this episode, we're going to take an honest look at the hardest part of inventory work, keeping it accurate after the initial excitement wears off. Building an inventory once is not the real challenge, because most teams can sit down, list what they know, and feel productive for a week. The real challenge is that AI environments change constantly, and if inventory does not change with them, it quietly turns into a false map. A false map is dangerous because leaders start making decisions based on systems that no longer exist, data flows that have changed, or ownership assignments that are outdated. In AI governance, accuracy matters even more because hidden adoption can happen quickly and because small changes, like a new data source or a vendor update, can shift risk dramatically. Routine governance checks are the mechanism that keeps inventory trustworthy, and a trustworthy inventory is the foundation for consistent oversight, defensible evidence, and fast response when something goes wrong. By the end, you should understand why inventories drift, what routine checks look like in practice, and how to design governance checks that keep inventory accurate without creating unnecessary friction. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful starting point is understanding why inventories drift in the first place, because drift is usually not caused by laziness. It is caused by normal organizational behavior. Teams adopt new tools quickly to solve immediate problems, and they may not think of that adoption as an AI system that must be inventoried. Engineers change configurations and integrations as part of improvement work, and those changes may not be recorded if inventory updates are not part of change control. Business owners change roles or leave, and the system ownership field becomes stale even if the system still runs. Vendors update models, add features, or change data handling behavior, and those changes can alter dependencies and risk classification without anyone updating records. Even well-intentioned teams may forget to retire inventory entries when pilots end, leaving ghost systems in the record. Beginners should notice that inventory drift is a predictable outcome if you treat inventory as a separate paperwork task rather than as part of normal workflow. The solution is not asking people to remember better. It is designing routines that catch drift automatically. Routine governance checks create that safety net by making accuracy verification a normal, repeatable habit. To keep inventory accurate, you need to treat inventory as a living system of record, not as a one-time snapshot. A living system of record is updated when new assets appear, updated when assets change, and updated when assets are retired, using a predictable process. This is where governance routines become practical, because governance defines the required checkpoints and responsibilities that force updates to happen. Beginners often assume that a central team can maintain inventory alone, but that rarely works because the central team does not see every change as it happens. Accuracy depends on shared responsibility, where system owners and teams that make changes are expected to update records, and governance verifies that they did. This shared model is not chaos if it is structured, because governance defines what must be updated and when. It also defines how updates are verified so accuracy does not depend on trust alone. When inventory is treated as a living record, it becomes something people rely on, and reliance is what motivates proper maintenance. An inventory that no one trusts will never become accurate, because no one will invest effort into a document they believe is already wrong. Routine governance checks begin with clear triggers, because the most efficient accuracy strategy is catching changes at the moments they occur. One key trigger is intake, meaning whenever a new AI use case is proposed or a new tool is requested, inventory creation is mandatory before work proceeds. Another key trigger is change control, meaning when a system undergoes meaningful change, such as a model update, new data source, expanded user base, or new integration, the inventory record must be updated as part of the change approval. A third trigger is vendor management, meaning when vendors release updates or change terms, dependencies and data handling fields must be reviewed. A fourth trigger is incident response, meaning after an incident, inventory should be reviewed and updated based on what was learned about actual data flows and system behavior. Beginners should understand that triggers reduce workload because they target updates to moments when the change is already being discussed. If you wait for periodic audits only, you accumulate drift and then face a large cleanup effort. Triggers keep the inventory accurate in small, manageable increments. This is how mature programs maintain accuracy without constant crisis. Periodic review is the other half of routine governance checks, and it exists because not all changes are captured perfectly by triggers. Periodic review means you set a schedule to validate inventory fields that commonly go stale, such as ownership, scope, data sources, dependency lists, and compliance classifications. The goal is not to re-inventory everything from scratch, but to confirm that key attributes remain correct and to catch hidden adoption or undocumented changes. Beginners might wonder why periodic review is necessary if intake and change control exist, but in real organizations, processes are not followed perfectly, and periodic review is the safety net that catches what slipped through. Periodic review frequency should match risk, meaning high-impact or high-sensitivity systems are reviewed more often than low-risk internal tools. This is the same risk-based logic you use for other governance routines, because limited time and attention should be spent where harm would be greater. Periodic review also creates a predictable rhythm, which makes inventory maintenance feel normal rather than disruptive. When periodic review is well designed, it improves trust because stakeholders know inventory is checked regularly. A practical routine governance check includes ownership validation, because ownership is one of the most fragile inventory fields and one of the most important for accountability. Ownership validation means confirming that the named system owner is still in the role, still understands their responsibilities, and still has the authority to coordinate updates and response. If ownership changes, the inventory must be updated, and the new owner must accept accountability explicitly rather than inheriting it silently. Beginners should understand that ownership is not a formality, because when an AI system produces harmful outputs or leaks sensitive information, the organization needs someone who can act immediately. Without a valid owner, issues can sit unresolved while teams debate who is responsible. Ownership validation also matters for governance because owners are often responsible for ensuring monitoring, change control, and periodic review happen. If ownership is stale, those routines may fail quietly. A governance check that includes ownership validation therefore prevents drift in both inventory and oversight. When ownership is consistently verified, the organization's decision system remains intact. Another core governance check is data flow validation, because data and prompts are where many AI risks concentrate and where drift can happen silently. Data flow validation means confirming what datasets the system uses, what categories of data are involved, and whether any new sources have been added. It also means confirming how prompts and outputs are handled, such as whether prompts and outputs are stored, logged, shared, or used for improvement. Beginners often assume data flows are stable, but in AI systems, teams may add new sources to improve usefulness, and those additions can expand compliance scope dramatically. Data flow validation also considers whether outputs are being used in new ways, such as being pasted into customer communications or being stored in new repositories. If these usage patterns change, the inventory must reflect the new output destinations and the new exposure pathways. A governance check that validates data flows helps prevent the organization from being surprised by an audit question like what data does this system process and where does it go? When data flow records are accurate, the organization can apply classification and controls correctly. This directly supports Task 13 because inventory is not meaningful without accurate data flow context. Dependency validation is another routine check that becomes critical in AI governance, because dependencies often change outside your control and can alter risk quickly. Dependency validation means confirming what external services, vendor models, internal databases, and integration points the system relies on. It also means confirming whether any dependency changes have occurred, such as new vendor features, new endpoints, or changes in data handling and retention behavior. Beginners should understand that dependency changes can create compliance and confidentiality risk, especially when data is sent to external services or when vendor terms change how data is processed. Dependency validation also supports reliability planning, because a critical system with a single dependency may require stronger contingency planning. Another subtle point is that dependencies can be layered, meaning one service might rely on another service, and those indirect dependencies can matter for risk. A governance check does not need to map every technical detail, but it should capture meaningful dependency changes that affect risk boundaries. When dependencies are validated regularly, the organization is less likely to be surprised by vendor-driven behavior changes. This supports defensibility because the organization can show it actively oversees third-party risk. Classification validation is a routine check that ensures sensitivity, criticality, and compliance scope labels remain accurate as systems evolve. Classification drift happens when a system's use expands, when new data sources are introduced, or when new obligations apply due to business changes. For example, an AI tool that began as an internal convenience assistant might become customer-facing, increasing both criticality and compliance scope. A system might begin with internal non-sensitive data, but later incorporate customer records, increasing sensitivity and regulatory obligations. A vendor dependency might change data handling behavior, increasing scope and requiring new safeguards. Beginners should see that classification validation is not about bureaucracy. It is about making sure controls remain proportionate to current risk. If classifications are stale, controls may be too weak for the real situation or too strong for low-risk systems, both of which cause problems. A routine governance check that includes classification validation supports consistency and fairness across teams. It also supports evidence because you can show that classification decisions are maintained, not frozen at launch. Classification is only useful when it remains current. Another important governance check is coverage validation, meaning confirming that the inventory actually includes all relevant AI systems and not just the ones governance already knows about. Coverage validation can be uncomfortable because it can reveal shadow adoption, where teams use AI tools without formal approval. Beginners should understand that shadow adoption is common because AI tools are accessible and useful, and teams may not realize they have created a governance obligation. Coverage validation, therefore, involves looking for signals of AI use, such as patterns of tool access, procurement requests, vendor invoices, or integration requests, depending on what the organization can observe. The goal is not to punish teams, but to bring systems into the governance process so risk is managed. A governance check that includes coverage validation should also include a safe path to compliance, meaning clear steps for bringing a system into inventory and aligning it with requirements. When coverage validation is regular, inventory becomes a more accurate reflection of reality. This reduces surprises and improves trust because leaders can make decisions based on a complete picture. Coverage is a critical part of accuracy because an inventory can be perfectly maintained and still be wrong if it is incomplete. Evidence and audit trail validation is another routine check that keeps inventory defensible because inventory is not only a list, it is an index to the program's proof. Evidence validation means confirming that required artifacts exist for each system, such as impact assessments for high-risk systems, approval records, monitoring plans, and change logs. It also means ensuring that links between inventory entries and evidence repositories are correct and up to date. Beginners should understand that auditors and contract partners often start with inventory and then ask for supporting evidence, so gaps here become visible quickly. Evidence validation also helps internal governance because it reveals where controls exist on paper but are missing in practice. For example, if a system is classified as high compliance scope but lacks recent review records, that is a risk signal that governance routines are not being followed. A routine check that includes evidence validation drives continuous improvement because it reveals where the process needs reinforcement. It also supports faster incident response because evidence is easier to find when inventory is accurate and linked to artifacts. When evidence validation is built into governance checks, the organization becomes calmer and more credible under scrutiny. Routine checks must be designed to be usable because if the process is too heavy, teams will bypass it and accuracy will decline. Usability means checks are proportional to risk, clear in what they require, and predictable in timing and ownership. It also means the inventory system itself should make updates straightforward, with clear fields and definitions so people do not debate what belongs where. Beginners should recognize that governance processes that feel arbitrary create resentment and encourage workarounds, while processes that feel fair and purposeful encourage compliance. Another aspect of usability is that checks should produce clear outcomes, such as updated ownership, confirmed data flows, adjusted classifications, or identified gaps with assigned remediation. If checks produce vague reports without action, people will see them as busy work. A mature program also limits the number of fields that must be reviewed in each cycle, focusing on the attributes most likely to drift and most important to risk. This keeps effort focused and sustainable. When checks are usable, accuracy becomes a natural byproduct of routine work rather than a special project. Finally, routine governance checks should include a feedback loop because the inventory and the process that maintains it should improve over time. If periodic reviews repeatedly find the same kind of drift, that might indicate change control triggers are not capturing a certain type of change, and the process should be adjusted. If teams repeatedly misunderstand a field, the definitions should be clarified or the field design improved. If coverage checks consistently find shadow adoption in a particular area, that might indicate the approved tools do not meet business needs, or that the intake process is too slow, and governance should address that root cause. Beginners should understand that maintaining inventory is a program management activity, not a one-time compliance action. Continuous improvement is what makes routine checks more efficient and less painful over time, because the program learns where drift comes from and stops it earlier. This also increases trust because stakeholders see the process producing real improvements rather than generating noise. When inventory maintenance includes feedback and improvement, it becomes a strong sign of program maturity. As we wrap up, keeping the AI inventory accurate requires routine governance checks because inventories drift naturally as tools, data flows, ownership, and dependencies change. A mature approach uses triggers like intake, change control, vendor updates, and incidents to capture changes as they happen, and it uses periodic reviews as a safety net to catch what slipped through. Routine checks validate ownership, data flows, prompts and outputs handling, dependencies, and classification labels so controls remain proportionate and defensible. They also validate coverage to reduce shadow adoption and validate evidence links so inventory remains a reliable index to proof. The checks must be usable and risk-based to avoid bypass, and they should include feedback loops so the process improves and becomes more efficient over time. For new learners, the key insight is that inventory accuracy is not a clerical detail. It is the foundation for every other governance and security decision because you cannot manage what you cannot trust. When routine checks keep inventory accurate, the organization gains visibility, consistency, and defensibility, which is exactly what Task 13 is aiming to ensure.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.